Okay, so we are recording. So today I'm talking to Philomene Kocher, who is a published poet and lives locally in the Kingston area. I am lucky enough to get to chat with her today. Hi Phil, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you, Katie? I'm glad to be here.
I'm good. Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much. So the first question I would like to ask is, could you tell us a little bit about the kind of poetry that you write?
Sure. So I began by writing haiku, and some of your students might be familiar with that. Primarily, I think it's usually taught around grade 5, and it's taught in a very formal kind of way. But I came to it as an adult, and so I have been writing now for close to 30 years, and I have one haiku that I will share. What I love about haiku is that it's so accessible because you can write poetry about anything. And this one I wrote after being in a grocery store. At the express checkout, I count the items of the customer ahead. At the express checkout, I count the items of the customer ahead. So what touched me about that moment in the grocery store was just catching myself and understanding that there were kind of these two things happening. It made me smile, first of all, because I wasn't really too concerned about what was in my grocery cart, but was about those for the person who was in front of me. So as I say, haiku can be written about absolutely anything. And that's one of the things that I love about it. After about 10 years writing haiku, myself and my other haiku poets who I know in Canada really embraced the form of Tanka, and that's spelled Tanka. And Tanka is a 5-line poem, and in some ways it's like having the 3 lines of a haiku followed by 2 lines where the poet can actually tell more from an emotional aspect. Generally, haiku on its own is more about, as much as possible, because we can never take all of ourselves out of the poem, but it's mostly about just relating what's happening in the moment. Whereas in a tanka, you can take that next step and talk a little bit more about your feelings. So this is a tanka that I wrote. I was on a bus. I used to attend the haiku group in Ottawa, so I went back and forth by bus quite often. Rain washes the dust from the bus window, and I can see more clearly what tears do. Rain washes the dust from the bus window, and I can see more clearly what tears do. So those are 2 of the forms of poetry I write. Haiku, and the 3-line poem, and tanka, the 5-line poem. There's also a few other forms. There is, the one I also write is called Haibun, and it's Haibun. And what that is as a poet, I can write a little bit of a story and then use a haiku as well to sort of give the essence of my story. And then there's usually a title as well. So I'll talk a little bit more about Haibun later, because I know we're going to talk more about memoirs. So those are the kinds of poetry I write: haiku, tanka, and Haibun.
Yeah, thank you so much, Phil. That's wonderful. And as you know, that last tanka is one of my favorites of yours as well. So that's great. So in terms of memoirs, do you feel that you write from that perspective when you write your poetry?
I'm inspired by a lot of things. Mostly nature. Sometimes I've written poems from images that have come to me in dreams. And sometimes, not often, but sometimes I've written haiku from previous experiences. So this is where it ties into your theme of memoir writing. So haiku is always written in the present moment. It's usually written in 3 lines, but we don't have to be tied so much to the 5-7-5 syllable count as you know, as students may have been taught. Most of the haiku poets I know and myself, we generally, there's a balance. How many words do you need so that you can tell everything you want to tell? But you don't want it so short that it becomes choppy because you've tried to take so many words out. So there's some kind of a balance. So I wanted to share one of my haiku. It's actually the first haiku I ever wrote back in 1991. And it's from a memory. When I was in grade 11, which was many moons ago, one of the things when we came back in September was to write about an experience in the summer. And so I remember writing, trying to write this thing about what I had seen and about what I saw as 2 different things, and I didn't know how to connect them. Years later, when I was around 30, I discovered haiku, and haiku doesn't say you have to pick one thing or another thing. Haiku is always saying, here's 2 things, and this is experience. And it takes it into the realm of paradox, where you're not having to decide. It's paradox, ambiguity, and that also leaves room for whoever listens to the poem to come in with their own experience. So this this poem may resonate for some of your students if they have connections to country. It's I grew up on a farm, so that's where this is coming from. So I'll read the poem. Most often haiku poets read their haiku twice just because they're so short, and then you can, if you missed a word or something the first time, you can catch it the second time. So this is the first haiku I ever wrote, and it is in the 5-7-5 because that's what I learned when I was starting to write. The farmer combines, while across the road the sheaves stand proudly in stooks. The farmer combines, while across the road the sheaves stand proudly in stooks. So what was really seemed so wondrous to me about haiku is that I could just put both of these things into the poem, and the combining, for those who might not know, that's a machine that goes behind a tractor, and it separates the grain from the straw. And that's a kind of harvesting, and it does everything at one time. The stooks are part of an old-fashioned harvesting process where there's a binder that creates the stooks. The stooks are then, or the sheaves are then put into stooks, and later they're picked up, taken to the barn where there would be a thrashing machine that would separate the grain from the straw. So when I was writing this very first haiku, it solved something for me that I couldn't seem to articulate or write about when I was in grade 11. What felt like this these 2 things that were happening at the same time, and a haiku just says, okay, that's what's happening now in the moment. And so that's from my very first poem, and I've come to realize more and more that what moves me to write a haiku is when I find something that feels like it's incongruent, like it doesn't fit. And that's usually a clue for me. Oh, something's going on here I need to pay attention with. For example, if I'm walking down the street and I see the delicate morning glory climbing up like an ancient oak tree. Oh, I say, there's two things there. The fragility of the flower and this, the immensity of the tree. So again, I just say to myself, okay, there's something going on here. And that's usually the clue for me to take out my pen and paper if I have it with me. So I don't know if you want to ask any questions about haiku before we go to the other poem or not.
Yeah, I mean, I think you did a wonderful job of explaining, as you always do, and it always makes me remember when I first sort of talked to you about haiku, and you were explaining it to a colleague's son, and I overheard, and I said, "Oh, I like haiku," and you said, "Oh, do you know about haiku?" And I said, "Well, yes, it's a 5-7-5, right?" And you were like, "Sort of." And then you explained it to me too. So I will always appreciate that. So thank you very much for sharing that with the students too. I think it's really important. I'm not sure, is there anything else you'd like to add before I ask you a couple other questions?
Well, I think what I'll do is I'll give an example of a haibun. Now, a haibun has three parts. It has a title, it has the story part, which can be just like a few sentences, and then a haiku. And like in a haiku where there's different parts, they don't say the same thing. They all kind of have different like angles about the experience, but they're not saying the same thing. So this is one. So again, before I read the haibun, I'm going to read a little piece from my friend's book. Her book is called On the Road to Naropa. It's my friend Terry Ann. And it was a memoir that she wrote through haibun. So each one of her little vignettes is written in haibun form. And this is what she had to say about writing it in this way. Someone once said that it was absurd to write a life in chronological order. It is only random moments that we remember, like picking marbles out of a bag. Well, here are a few marbles, absurd, abundant, true. And what I loved about Terry Ann's words is that really when we're called to record something, whether it's in a poem form or if it's in a story, it comes from those moments that are a little more vibrant or a little more connected to us. And so this haibun I wrote, many years after it happened, obviously. So in the story part, a student can write what they want, but the haiku itself is always written in the present moment as if it's happening right now. So the title is called Warmth. Rural Ontario, December 1967. I was in grade 3. My teacher invited me to be on a float in the Santa Claus parade. The float would be a hay wagon. I would be one of the 7 dwarfs, and an older student would be Snow White. I wanted to wear a tissue paper outfit. My mother insisted that I wear a warm coat and snow pants under my costume. I cried, telling her that everyone else would only be wearing their tissue paper costume, not stupid snow pants. She still insisted. Winters were cold back then, and I was actually glad to be warm for the 10-minute ride through the village. I don't ever remember thanking her. Late evening, a vase of red tulips on the kitchen table.
I love that one too. It's so great, and you're right. It allows you to participate too, because that brought me back to when my first play, and I was in grade 3, and it was called Kids in Space, and we got to be planets. So everybody got to be a planet, dancing around with these ribbons, and I was so excited I got to be in the play, except I was the planet Uranus. So my dad thought it was hilarious, and I cried because he couldn't stop laughing that my first acting job was Uranus.
Yes, these moments that have a lot of meaning for us, right? So I think both of those, like, and for you as well, it's really about, we don't remember like all the moments of our day. We don't remember all our moments of grade 3, but there are these signature moments. And so it's okay to go back and get them and to write. Obviously, that's what memoir is, and to bring them now and to write them now. And who knows, like what sharing some of those experiences, either someone will smile at a remembrance or somebody will, just become, have a tender moment if that's what touches them. And not all haiku touch every single person, but when they do, it's quite remarkable. I've always found, I still think of it as magic, that 10 words, about 10 words, can create this magic moment um, where you can go somewhere. And my experience of the poem is not maybe the same as your experience of the poem, but that doesn't mean that those 10 words might not, bring up some memory in you as well, right? So
Yeah.
it depends. And sometimes there are poets, I read all of their haiku and they all just touch my heart. And then there's others that I might not get for the references or whatever. But when a haiku does make its mark, because surprisingly, in a haiku, I'm not telling you how I feel, but by the choice of the words that I use, and you stepping into that experience, like you even did with your sharing your grade 3 experience, like it brings up our, our memory of it, but often also our emotional memory of it as well, which is just astonishing to me that words can do that, and particularly just using these few words. So here I am, 30 years later, still writing haiku, and still in awe of its magic, of how, sharing these two things that I see or hear or smell, taste, touch, or whatever, I share these two things, and then all of a sudden you can have an experience. Anyways, I just find it astonishing.
I agree. I think it's wonderful, and just to have that simplicity and that simple prose, that simple flow to be such a shared experience. And you're right, I hadn't thought about it that way, but you're right. You don't tell me like what's your feeling in that, you tell me what you're experiencing, what you're taking in, and then I draw my own feelings as a reader sort of through that poem, which is quite amazing. You're right, it is magical. It's awesome. Yeah. So do you think, I suppose, as a follow-up question to that, poetry is such an amazing art form, and sometimes I feel like it's a lost art form. Like I remember growing up too, I thought I wanted to be a poet for a while, and I know I still could be, and I know that's a possibility and everything, but sometimes I feel like we don't always value it as much as we should, and it's such a significant part of literary history. Do you where do you see its place, like its value? Because I know it's incredibly valuable, so I'm just interested on your perspective, I suppose, on that.
I can speak a little bit to lyric poetry. I've written some longer poems, but not a lot of them. Those poems, I feel that because poetry, if it's done well, is calling on all of us. It's calling on our mind. It's calling on our heart to participate. There might be body memories involved with, with the poem as well, like if we can remember, what we were doing at that time or whatever. So I feel that poetry calls all of us to be present. And in particular, because I write haiku, I feel that haiku in particular has a real, well, certainly a beauty and an elegance to it. But all poetry, including haiku, has an element of service to it. So I feel in sharing haiku with others, and whether someone might laugh or be touched by a poem, for that moment, there's connection. And if there's anything that this particular year in these particular circumstances have taught us, is that connection is more important than anything else. I grew up on a farm, so it was pretty early for me that I had a connection to the nature that was around me. However, I've lived in Kingston for close to 30 years. And so, nature's all around me here too. I can see it out of my office window. It's everywhere. So when my friend and I go for a walk at Lemoyne's Point, yes, that's nature. But so is the cedar bush that's in my front yard here at my apartment building. So I love that haiku is accessible. You need a pen or pencil and a piece of paper, that's the size of an envelope, right? That's all you need to be able to do this, and a willingness to see. So what I think haiku does, I think haiku is a kind of mindfulness poetry. And what it's done for me is really remind me about my connection to nature. So two of the things that I find that help me find haiku or help them find me is one is going for a walk. And two is slowing down. So those kind of go together. So I do have a whole collection, as you probably know from my book, a lot of bus haiku, either city bus or buses that go between cities. And that's because that's a place where I'm slowed down. And I think, we've all been slowed down this year. So again, it's like, what is, can I notice the things that are around me? And, haiku is generally, looking at one of the five senses, but it also can look at the insight. So that one about the grocery store moment, there wasn't any huge light bulb moment, just the insight of laughing at myself, counting, someone else's grocery numbers. So it can also be insight. And it's about, am I willing to slow down enough and take a breath and just look around me at everything that's going on? And then if I do, often haiku will find me. That's what I want to say. Although, I've led lots of workshops, Katie, so individuals can write haiku in a workshop. And certainly for you, if you're teaching in a classroom, it doesn't mean that you have to necessarily go outside and go for a walk around your house or yard to write a haiku. What is important is that you recall a moment or check out either if I'm writing it in this moment right now, because there's more sunlight coming through my window than there was a minute ago. So the sun slanting through my office window, compared to earlier today or yesterday when it was the first snow, right? Which caught me off guard and everyone else kind of. So, there are a lot of first snow haiku that have that as a first line. So, but so it's about what do I see around me? And mostly it's about connection to nature, but because haiku are also about my connections with other individuals, it's also connections with others. So if that would be sort of the bottom line, we need that connection, and we need to be connected to nature, so that what you pay attention to, you care for. That's what Mary Oliver, the poet, has said. And so if we notice and care for nature, automatically our whole being is going to be in service to caring for nature and protecting nature in the ways that we can. So I think it's incredibly important, poetry in general. There's so much going on in our world, Katie, so many challenges. And I really believe that beauty is a way to, it's like a healing agent or something, because to see beauty means that we're being receptive and we're able to have that kind of connection with our world. So I don't know if that's been a lot of conversation around the topic, but I don't know your
Yeah.
thoughts on poetry as well, and how it, as my friends have used the term poetry in service, but I feel that poetry by its very nature is in service, because it's calling us into more connection. So it automatically does that, and the intention to do that, by sending it out into the world, by sharing a haiku by email with somebody who might need a lift for the day. So there's so many different ways that it can be in service. So
Yeah, I think that's such a wonderful insight. And I completely agree with you. We need connection now more than ever, and as much as I feel like technology connects us in a way, it also disconnects us. And it especially, I think, disconnects us from the immediate world around us and from nature. So I love that thought, that is something that is so necessary. We're human beings and we are a community species. We need each other, and we are not, we have not conquered nature. Nature, in fact, could very easily conquer us. So to hold that in reverence and respect and notice these things, I think is a really incredible thing to do and so important. Yeah. It has been absolutely so wonderful chatting with you, Phil. Is there anything else you thought that you might like to add before
I guess it would just be a reminder for you and your students that poetry in the form of haiku is closer than you could even imagine. Um, you know, uh, some of my friends say, well, it's a really hard form to write about or write with. And yet in workshops, surprisingly, many students who have shown up, including some of my friends, just because they wanted to be at the reading at the library, they would jump in and begin writing. All you need is a pen and paper, and 30 seconds to write it down. I would also say that if you get the first line of something or you notice something, to write it down, and then it can always be a seed for something later. So that has actually happened. I didn't have the whole poem, but I just wrote part down, and then a year later something happened and I wrote the full thing down. So I would just, I guess it's because I love it so much, but it's so available, that to choose just a few small words, and if someone doesn't have those words of their own, there's lots of haiku websites, and to maybe find some haiku. Maybe that would be a suggestion I would leave with you and your students, to maybe whenever you have this class, is to write a haiku, or to find one and to share one with someone, and just to see, just to make that connection. So that might be what my suggestions might be.
Yeah, I love that idea. That's wonderful. And I am so glad that you reminded me of that, because you told me about writing one line at a time. And I think that's brilliant. We put so much pressure on ourselves to, oh, I can't write a whole poem. You don't have to do it all at once. Like, I like wolf looms behind me even could be the start of, and I could save that for later,
Right.
or whatever. So yeah.
Right.
Thank you so much, Phil. This has
It's
been
been a pleasure.
absolutely wonderful. Mhm.
Happy to talk about haiku and to invite others into the realm of poetry through the doorway of haiku.
Yeah, of course. Uh, well, I guess there we are. I might have to edit this last part out, but I'm gonna